Welcome, everyone. My name is Charlene Margot, and I am co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture, the program that brings you tonight's Parent Education Series event with Becky Sabky, author of Valedictorians at the Gate, Standing Out, Getting In, and Staying Sane While Applying to College. We are so delighted to bring you this presentation, and with more than 550 registrants, we know that this is something that you all want to hear about. So we could not be more delighted. Becky and I started talking last fall. Can't believe that we are finally here. So again, welcome everybody. It's going to be a busy night. Before we get started, I want to tell you that we have simultaneous Spanish interpretation this evening with Kaylee Juarez. So if you need Spanish, instructions are in the chat, or you can click on the globe icon and then Spanish. The rest of you, we will be staying on English for tonight's presentation. We would like to thank our sponsors, the Menlo Atherton High School PTA, the Sequoia Healthcare District, the Sequoia Union High School District, Peninsula Healthcare District, and San Mateo High School District, in addition to the nonprofit, The Parent Venture. We could not present these programs without you, and we're so glad to be here with you this evening. A special thanks again tonight to author Becky Munsterer Sabky, former Ivy League college admission director, who is zooming into us all the way from Vermont. Thank you, Becky, for staying up late and joining us out here in California. Tonight's format, those of you are probably familiar with Zoom by now, but this is a webinar format. So you, the audience, have two ways to interact with us. There's both a chat button. My partner, Bev Hartman, will be putting resource links and information in the chat, so do look for that. At the end of the evening, there will be a very short survey, 4 questions. We hope that you will take a minute to fill that out. For your own questions, we ask that you put those in the Q&A button. So again, comments to us, resource links in the chat, questions in the Q&A. After Becky's remarks, I will rejoin her for Q&A, and we really want to hear from you, the audience. So please, either during the talk or at the end of it, put your questions in the Q&A box. That would be awesome. Also, tonight's event is being recorded and will be available soon on our video library, which is a YouTube channel now with more than 36,000 views. We know that you, parents, educators, community members, and even students are really using the video library to research and find information about topics of importance to parents and caregivers. So again, please do use that free resource. And let me tell you a little bit about tonight's featured presenter. Becky Munsterer Sabky is a former director of international admissions at Dartmouth College and the author of Valedictorians at the Gate, Standing Out, Getting In, and Staying Sane While Applying to College. She spent 2 years working in the admissions office at St. Lawrence University before her 13-year career at Dartmouth College. Becky is a graduate of Colby College, and she received her MALS degree in creative writing from Dartmouth. She is also an award-winning monthly newspaper columnist, a blogger, and the author of the viral New York Times op-ed, "Check this box if you're a good person." I hope I could check that. She's been interviewed by Vermont Public Radio, Boston Public Radio, and NPR's Chalkboard Chat. Her commentary has appeared in such well-known media outlets as Bloomberg and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Grown and Flown, and others. She lives in Norwich with her husband and 2 young children. Please join me in a really warm virtual welcome for Becky Sabky. Take it away, Becky.
Oh, thank you, Charlene. I am so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this evening for a while, and I have to tell you, my toddlers are asleep upstairs, so it feels really exciting. It's 8:30 on the East Coast, and my kids are asleep, and life is good. So I'm hoping that we'll have a lot of fun this evening. I thought before I start, I would kind of explain how the book was written, why the book was written, and how it came to be, because I think the story of the book sets the tone for what I want to share tonight. As Charlene mentioned, I worked at Dartmouth for many years. I was one of the directors of admissions. Before that, I was at St. Lawrence University. And I loved working in college admissions. It was a dream job for many, many reasons. But 5 years ago, when I became pregnant with my first child, I knew that I likely was going to leave the office because I knew that just family circumstances, I wasn't going to be able to do the travel that I had done as one of the directors of international admissions. And so maybe it was the kind of, maternity hormones running through me. Maybe it was knowing that I was leaving this job that I loved so much. But I sat down one day before I left the office and I said, I want to write something that kind of captures the feelings that I had for this career, because it was a wild job, right? At Dartmouth, they admitted about 10% of the students who applied while I was there. And so becoming a mom myself, I felt like I had to write something down to just capture that moment before I left that job. And I sat down and I wrote the New York Times op-ed that Charlene just mentioned called "Check This Box If You're a Good Person." And what it was about was the most memorable recommendation letter I had ever read in my career. And I estimate I probably read about 30,000 letters of recommendations from all sorts of people, mostly teachers and counselors, but a lot of headmasters, a lot of celebrities, a lot of politicians. Yet the one recommendation letter of the thousands that stood out over all of those years was a letter from a high school custodian. And that high school custodian in that college recommendation letter wrote that he felt that he wanted to write on a student's behalf because this was the only student in all of the years of that custodian's career who bothered to learn his name. And I remember working in the admissions office and bringing that letter to the admissions committee with other colleagues. And I remember we were so dumbfounded by it because we had never seen anything like it. We've gotten so many letters from headmasters and politicians going on and on about students, but we had never had a letter from a custodian who said, look, the reason you should admit this kid is not just because he's a smart kid and not just because he's an involved kid, but he took the time to learn my name and no one else bothered to do that all these years. And that stuck with me. And so I wrote this New York Times op-ed basically saying that what needs to matter in our kids is not only that they succeed in high school, but that they also remember what matters. And so I left the office, the op-ed got published, and the next thing I knew, it went viral. And I was getting letters from all of these people saying, this needs to be a book. And I was a writer, I am a writer, I was an English major. And so I sat down and I wrote a book about what needs to matter in our kids. And I talked about, kindness and curiosity and all of those things that as parents, as families, we try to instill in our kids. And I brought it to a publisher and they read it and they said to me, Becky, this is good. However, at the end of the day, students still need to sit down and fill out a college application if they want to go to college. And the publisher said to me, how can you help them not only remember and keep perspective about what matters, but also give them prescriptive advice for how to take their authentic selves and present them in a college application so that at the end of the day, they feel good about the process. And it was this aha moment for me because I had been focusing so much on how to tell kids, what matters is not whether or not you get into an Ivy League school, but that you're a good kid. But it was also this they're also going to need to fill out a college application. And that's the process. And that's what's driving people crazy. And that's what all this hullabaloo is about. And so I rewrote half of the book to create this hybrid book, which is now Valedictorians at the Gate, which offers both perspective, how to, keep your eye on the prize on what matters in our young people, but also prescriptive advice for, hey, you're going to have to write an essay. Let's talk about what works and what doesn't work. And so tonight, I wanted to kind of frame this whole talk with both the perspective and the prescriptive, because I think, I think this process really feels out of a lot of people's control. And what I want to help everyone do is figure out what is still in their control so that they can take back control of this process, make it feel their own, fill out a college application that is authentic, that does present a thorough kind of reflection of who they are as a person, and put forward their strongest application so that at the end of the day, they can feel good about their application and they'll thrive no matter where they go. And so I thought I'd structure, because we could talk in all sorts of directions about the college admissions process. I thought I'd structure the talk by covering the top 5 college admissions questions I receive. And we're going to start with kind of the vague ones and work into the nitty gritty. And I know you guys out there are audiences of all different stages, freshmen through seniors in this process. So bear with me, but I think there'll be a little bit of everything for folks tonight. So the first question, I mean, the most obvious question I get is, where do I start? And I think particularly this time of year for rising juniors that are really starting kind of this process, as well as students, younger students, it can be overwhelming. And I look back at my own experience. I went to a public high school in New Jersey. My parents had both gone to college, so I had them on my side and to help figure this out. But there wasn't a lot of support in the school as far as the college counseling office was concerned. And when people ask me, where do I start and how do I develop a list? I think the thing here is that there are lots of directions to go, but there are two mistakes to make. The first mistake being to be too paralyzed by this process and put it off for too long because it feels overwhelming. And the other mistake is, the far side of that spectrum, which is get too hyper focused on a singular school that you feel like you're putting too many eggs in the basket. And I'm going to tell you a personal story. So when I was in high school, I was a decent student. I did well. I checked boxes. At that time, I believed that you had to check boxes to get into the schools you wanted to get into. So I was the president of National Honor Society. I played a sport. I was trying to do all of the things so that I could check off the resume to get into my dream school, which was Dartmouth College. And let me tell you, I knew I was going to Dartmouth. Like, I had gotten good grades. My, father's best friend's businessman's partner went there. So I thought I had an in. I had visited campus many times. I knew people on the ski team. Like, I was so hyper-focused on Dartmouth that I was crushed when I received that rejection letter. And I received my rejection letter from Dartmouth, and I couldn't believe I didn't get in. And then I didn't get into my second choice school, my third choice school, my fourth choice school, and I did get into my fifth choice school. And at the time, I had been so fixated on Dartmouth that it felt like such a personal slap in the face. It felt like a judgment of my self-worth. It felt like I did something wrong. And I ended up going to my fifth choice school, which was Colby College in Maine, and I loved it. It was perfect for me. I made the most of the experiences. I was challenged. I got involved in the admissions office, which got me back in the admissions career. Years later, I had an opportunity to apply for a position to work in the admissions office at Dartmouth. And I thought, well, this is ironic, right? This is the school that denied me, and now I want to work in their admissions office. And the same dean of admissions who denied me, who wrote the letter of rejection, hired me. And I thought, this is crazy, right? Like, I didn't get in here, and now I'm deciding who gets in. And I have to tell you, I kept my rejection letter in my office all of those years I worked at the college to both help kind of humble me and be more sympathetic to a place that was denying 90% of their students. But also as kind of this realization of the pressures on students that they're trying to do everything right. And when I worked at the college and I saw the applications coming in, it was a wake-up call to me that an admissions decision is not a judgment of self-worth. It is not a judgment of who is checking the right boxes. It is not a judgment of anyone who is wiser, smarter, has more potential, is more engaged. I learned that the admissions decisions colleges are making are business decisions. These colleges are trying to keep their institutions afloat. They're trying to diversify and increase their high school profile in terms of the rigor of the student body, of all sorts of things. It's a business. And when I worked there and I started reading all these applications, I thought, oh my gosh, it makes sense that I got denied because there are so many fabulous applicants out there. And it also kind of made me think, oh my goodness, I went to Colby College. I loved Colby College. It was the perfect place for me. And as I worked in admissions, it became more and more obvious that students have so many good options and that getting fixated on one school is a mistake. And so when students say, where do I start? I tell them to be open-minded. I tell them to find a support group, whether that's parents, whether that's older siblings, whether that's a teacher, whether that's a mentor. Find people who can help you with this process. And, you know, particularly with parents will ask me, like, what should my role be? And I will tell them, like, I really think it's important that parents are co-learners with their students rather than being helicopter parents, rather than, you know, taking a total backseat. When I worked at Dartmouth, I would see lots of parents who had gone through the college process and thought they knew what colleges were looking for because they went to Dartmouth in 1974, and that wasn't necessarily the case, right? College admissions changes. And so I tell parents, whether their students are first generation college and their parents didn't go to college, or whether their parents both graduated from the institution of their dreams, you know, being a co-learner and going into this process thinking, okay, let me see what's out there. Let me buy a college guide and think about, wow, I'm interested in liberal arts schools, or wow, I'm really interested in staying in the Midwest, or wow, I'm really interested in schools that have a geology major. Starting to kind of think about those things and developing a list. You know, I saw that most students apply between 8 to 12 schools these days. And I would say, you know, that feels like a healthy number to start thinking about schools and getting excited about all of them, because any school out there has the opportunity for potential and growth for you if you give it that chance. And so don't get too fixated, don't get too paralyzed, get a book, start somewhere, and it's going to be okay. My kind of prescriptive advice and my professional tip, particularly now during the pandemic, is I tell students, if you're interested in a school, I think in addition to going online, you know, if you're interested in Duke, for example, you can go online to Duke's website. I think you should, you know, look at all of their admissions information, whether they have a guided online tour, whether they have kind of a chat room with students, whatever they have to offer, definitely take advantage of it. But in addition, my little professional tip is I tell students to read the online student newspapers. Lots of schools have student newspapers. You know, Dartmouth has the Dartmouth, it's thedartmouth.com, which is an all-run student newspaper. And I think that's a great way, you know, if you're interested in UCLA, read their student newspaper, find out what students are saying about campus. What are the hot topics? What's controversial? What kind of events are happening on campus? How are they handling the pandemic? I think student newspapers are a great place to get in kind of an unedited view of how students are thriving, what they care about, and what's going on campus. So in addition to all of that stuff, when you're thinking about colleges, read some student newspapers, because I think oftentimes you'll get some good, juicy information there. The second question I get, and this is a big one, is it better in college's eyes to get a B in an honors class and an A, or an A in a regular class, or, you know, a B minus in an AP class? You know, kids are constantly asking me, like, what grades are you looking for, and what curriculum are you looking for, and should I be taking, you know, 4 years of a foreign language, or should I skip my 4th year of foreign language to take AP statistics, and all of these questions about curriculum and grades. Excuse me. And I think what's helpful is to take a step back and peek behind the curtain to how applications at many schools are read. Now, as a disclaimer, I speak mostly about the Common Application, which is an application used by many, many colleges in the United States. I also speak, when I speak about Dartmouth, first of all, I've made everything confidential. So if I'm talking about an applicant, I've fictionalized that applicant, because I can't, for legal reasons, and because I love Dartmouth College. Like, I love my colleagues, they do a great job, and I'm not allowed to speak about anything that happened when it came to actual applicants in the office. So there's that. But, you know, when any college or university, particularly if they're doing a holistic application review, which means they look at everything, when they're looking at your application, most of them will really kind of break it into 2 parts. The first being your, quote, academic pieces. So that includes your transcript, something called your high school profile, I'll talk about in a second, your testing, as well as your recommendations. Then the other pieces are really the more personal pieces, and that includes your personal statement, which is the big college essay, you know, your resume, maybe your alumni interview, and kind of all of the other pieces there that are more personal. And so when reading the academic pieces of an application, students get so fixated on numbers, right? Like I have a 3.55 GPA, and I would tell students that means nothing to me, and unless I look at your transcript, because this is on a 4-point scale, this is on a 5-point scale, what kind of classes are you taking? And so when I would read an application, we would start with your transcript, right? Because frankly, looking at transcripts is easy, right? A's are good, F's are bad. So we would start with your transcript, and we wouldn't just look at the GPA, we would look at all the grades, and we would look at all the classes, and we would say, okay, what is little Johnny doing with the opportunities available to little Johnny? Now, from there, when looking at your transcript, we would look at something called the high school profile. And what a high school profile is it is a document that colleges and universities often require with an application that tells us a little bit about your high school. And so some of them are big 4-page glossy sheets that tell us all sorts of things, like where all the students in your high school go to college. Some of them are more simplistic pieces of paper. But I tell students, no matter where you are in this process, if you're a freshman or a senior, get a copy of your high school profile. You can get it from your college counselor, you can get it from your guidance office, your counseling office. But it's just a great way to see what colleges and universities are going to see about your high school, because we all know you all go to very different high schools out there. And so what we would do is we would take your high school profile and we would take your transcript, we put them next to each other, and we'd say, okay, what are you doing with the opportunities available to you? And so we would look that the students were taking challenging yet appropriate classes, right? We didn't want to see students drowning in 8 AP classes and not being able to do the work. And we also didn't want to see students, floating by in easy breezy classes because it was easy to get straight A's if they were taking classes that weren't really challenging them. From the transcript, then we would go to the recommendations. And most colleges in the United States require recommendations. The Common Application requires 2 teacher recommendations as well as a counselor recommendation. And for us, teacher recommendations and counselor recommendations were really helpful because they would give us the story behind the transcript, right? Like, who is the student behind these numbers? And I just have to read this because this was crazy to me. In today's Atlanta Journal-Constitution, there was an article written by a columnist I know, and she wrote, right now, the percentage of students, the percentage of students graduating from high school with an A average has grown from 39% in 1998 to 55% in 2021. 55% of students graduating from high school in the US have an A average. And so you can see what these colleges are up against, right? A averages, don't mean much if 55% have them. So we need to go deeper. So those recommendation letters are where I personally would get a lot of anecdotal information, intangible qualities. I would love reading a recommendation letter where maybe a history teacher would say, Susie here, maybe she doesn't have the highest GPA in the class, but she's the one I want to sit next to on the class trip, because talking to her about, current events is more exciting than anyone else in her class, right? Like, those kind of things would often come out in recommendation letters. Counselors would often give us kind of background information on students, maybe, during these pandemic years, holy moly, there's so much to talk about, right? So maybe the counselor says, hey, we were out of school for 16 months and Johnny lives in a house where he shares internet with 5 brothers and sisters. And, like, all of that stuff comes out. And it's helpful to kind of understand, again, kind of the academic whole, the intellectual whole, which brings me to testing. And I get so many questions about testing. And just yesterday, the SATs announced some new changes at testing where, they're going to make it all online. And things are always changing with testing. And the test optional kind of pandemic world right now, I think, is making a lot of people anxious and uneasy. And from where I sit, I think, again, taking back control. Like, how do we take back control of things that feel like they're very out of our control? And for me, testing is one piece of the puzzle that goes with the teacher recs, goes with the counselor recs, goes with your transcript. And for me, testing often, both at St. Lawrence and at Dartmouth, what we put out there is often what we would get back. And what I mean by that is in US News and World Report, and I don't remember the numbers, so forgive me, but when I was at St. Lawrence, if the average test score at, St. Lawrence was a 1100 while I was there, the average test scores that we would get from applicants would be about an 1100, right? When I was at Dartmouth, if the average test score at Dartmouth was about a 1400, the average test scores we would get back were a 1400. And particularly in a test optional world, that's what they're going to get, because you're not going to send it unless it's somewhere within that average. Now, I think where testing gets interesting are, again, the two extremes. And for me, I worked at a place where, the testing was so strong. The testing was so strong. And yet sometimes we would get students who would have really excellent test scores. And yet the rest of their academic application wouldn't live up to it. And we would much rather take a kid whose day-to-day transcript and recommendation letter said, here's the kid that, lights up a classroom, gets strong grades, comes in day in, day out. And, if his testing wasn't quite there, there would be enough there to kind of make the case if he was still within that somewhat of a, average world, as opposed to what I would see happen sometimes are kids with amazing scores. And then their teacher recs would say, it comes naturally. And it would drive me crazy. And we would deny students. I personally denied students with perfect scores because the rest of their applications didn't live up to their scores. Vice versa, we would have students who, because we know testing is flawed. We know that the socioeconomic background of students can really affect their testing. We know it's flawed. And so we would also see students who didn't have test results that were fantastic, but yet if they had all of these other things that were strong and we wanted at our college, we would take them regardless of their testing. However, for the majority, it was this kind of like big, kind of nebulous average. And so when I see students get so upset about testing, I say to them, what's in your control here? Like what is in your control is to prep as much for testing as possible. Go to the library, get a book, prep as much for testing as possible, take the tests. And then what is in your control is the day in and day out, what you're doing at your school. How are you developing relationships with teachers? What are you bringing in the classroom every day? Focus on the day-to-day. Don't sweat the testing so much, because what is in your control is, are you learning for the sake of learning so that when you get to college, you feel prepared, right? And so when students get so crazy about like, what GPA do I need? Should I take more APs? What are colleges looking for? I tell them, cool down. Colleges are looking for kids who are making the most of high school. And if you keep your eyes on the prize that high school matters, and you make the most of the opportunities available in high school, you're going to be okay, whatever college you land at. And so taking back that control, taking classes that make sense, taking classes that challenge you, it's the best you can do. I got to keep moving. So the next kind of question I get is about resume, right? Like, I would get questions. Does it look better to colleges if I have, a gritty job where I'm working 40 hours a week at McDonald's, or should I really go do that Brown summer program because it'll show Brown that I'm really interested? We'd get all these questions about what kids should be doing to look good for colleges. And I challenge that and I say, you should be doing what is good for you and stop worrying about what looks good to colleges, because you're never going to know what looks good to colleges, and it shouldn't matter. What should matter is, how are you preparing for the world? And so, whether you're working the 40-hour, a week job at McDonald's and learning about how hard customer service is, which is a valuable lesson to learn, or whether you go to the Brown summer program and you think, holy moly, it is hard to, be away from home for this long, or, whatever your experience is. Stop trying to check boxes. And instead, my professional tip to students is, think about what you're already doing. Think about what you enjoy doing and figure out a way to thoroughly explain that in the application. And it would drive me crazy. There's this one section of the Common Application where many colleges would ask you, what's your most significant extracurricular activity? And we would get, we'd get resumes of kids that are just doing everything. And I'm guilty. I did this, right? I checked all the boxes. I made sure I did community service and all that stuff. And we'd get these long resumes of all these things kids are doing. And yet that question would say, okay, what's the most significant? And students, I think, would either rush or wouldn't really think it was that important to answer that question. And they'd write, soccer is the most important because it taught me teamwork. And I would say to them, tell us a little more, like expand on this. We'd see so many soccer players, like, can you help us out a little bit more? And so for me, I think to myself, gosh, you don't have to go do things to look good for college. You need to do things because you're a human being who has the opportunity to do things and be an interesting person. And I get critical of myself because, again, when I was in high school, I, focused on the things I thought I needed to do for college to admit me. And yet looking back on it, I used to go, my grandfather lived on the Jersey Shore, and he taught me my love of metal detecting, like a metal detector where you go on the beach and you swing it back and forth, and we would never find anything. We'd find quarters and bottle caps and nickels. But, he'd tell me stories about shipwrecks and, the things we could find. And I loved it. I was geeky. It was so silly to, other people, but I loved metal detecting with my grandpa, and any chance I had, I would do it. And I still have a metal detector today. And I think about that. And I think as a high school kid, if someone said to me, hey, Becky, write about metal detecting in your application, or make sure you include that, I would say, what the heck are you talking about? Right? Like, I need to tell them I'm in National Honor Society. But gosh, as an application reader, like reading about someone who loved metal detecting and, found a love of history through her grandfather's eyes of shipwrecks. I mean, so interesting and so authentic. And I think it doesn't have to be quirky like metal detecting. You don't have to go do quirky things, but I can promise you, you are all doing things already that are authentically exciting to you. And whether it's learning, grandma's bolognese recipe, or whether it's surviving the pandemic by, literally putting up with your brothers and sisters in a, 1-bedroom apartment, like whatever this might be, those are the things that you want to make sure that you include in your application, as well as all the, standard stuff. And for me, there's a section of the application, it's called additional information. And this is my professional tip, but it says, is there anything else you want us to know? And 99% of the time, no one would write anything in that section because they wouldn't know what to do with it. And I scream to students, I say, please, use that section to tell us anything. And if, we had one student, I'll have to make this confidential, but let me fictionalize it a little bit. But we had one student one year who was like, I just want to let you know that Mrs. So-and-so, my Spanish teacher, has never given an A in the history of the school, and I got a B+, and it's the highest grade in the class. And, other people might say, oh, that's an obnoxious thing to say, but I thought, wow, that's really helpful. It's good to know that you've got a tough teacher who's never given an A, right? Or if you're someone who wakes up at 4 a.m. and is worried about your college application because you're worried that, an admissions committee at, Stanford is going to judge you because you took, art over, Latin 4, write to them and say, hey, in the additional information, I want to let you know that I love art. It's my outlet. I love drawing, blah, blah, blah. Like whatever it is that keeps you up at night, or you're nervous about, or you think might not be important, but excites you, this application is your chance. And I think, again, to take back control of the process, you almost want to think of the admissions officer that you're sending your application to as your lawyer, in that you want to give them as much evidence as possible to make the case to the admissions dean that you are, 1 in 10, because that's what I could only admit 1 in 10. And in these seas of pools of applicants, it doesn't have to be the quirkiest. You're not going to know who they're going to pick because they're just trying to create a class, and they've got legacies, and they've got to do athletes, and they have to get, art major. They've got to get all this stuff in here, and that's out of your control. You're not going to be able to control that. But what you can control is giving it your all, writing down everything and pushing it forward. And so when it comes to resumes, when it comes to extracurriculars, just be thorough, explain everything. Don't use acronyms because admissions officers don't know what, CCBA is, right? Explain everything, and then feel good about it when you're done. I got to move because I know, oh my goodness, it's 9:05. Okay. Next one is essay, right? So many questions about the essay. What should I write about? What shouldn't I write about? What looks good? Great. I give hour-long presentations about essays. And I think, my best tip for the essay is know that there is no such thing as the great American college essay. There is not one essay that I ever read and I thought, oh, this kid has to get in solely because of the essay. There is no one essay that is going to make an admissions officer stand up and clap, right? There's no such thing as the perfect essay that's going to get you into college. Unfortunately, most essays that admissions officers receive are quote unquote good. They're telling an admissions office something about a person in a first person narrative that's personal. And so the good news is you can take, a little bit of pressure off yourself because there's no such thing as the perfect essay and you're never going to write it. The bad news is you still need to write a good essay. And for a good essay, I would say a good essay is any essay that says something that's not already in the application. So you don't, if you're a soccer recruit and you're going to play soccer at, St. Olaf, you don't want to write about soccer in your essay, period. Like they're going to know you're a soccer recruit, write about something else. You don't want to write about a big mistake I saw. I read about this in the book. I have a whole chapter about essays in the book, but we'd see a lot of like my grandma is my hero essays where we would want to admit your grandma and not you because you're talking so much about how much you love grandma that it doesn't really say anything about you. So I would avoid any kind of, my soccer coach is my hero, my teacher is my hero, because we want it to be personal. And then lastly, I tell students to kind of do this exercise where if I took your essay and I made it anonymous, I took your name off of it and I put it up on my wall. And then I took all of the other essays in your school and made them anonymous and put them on my wall. If I invited your best friend to come in and find your essay, could she find it? And if the answer is yes, she could find it, then I would say, could she find it if I had all of the essays in the state up there? And if the answer is, well, maybe, then the next question would be, what about all the essays in the country? Because I think if it's too broad, if anyone could write this essay, it's not personal enough. And so you just have to kind of keep narrowing it down, try to get as focused as possible, try to get, a thesis statement in there that is only something you could say, because, an essay that says, I like playing soccer because teamwork is important to me. We got a lot of those. And so you have to dive a little bit deeper and kind of really make your point. My professional tip, my prescriptive advice when it comes to essays is, frankly, to me, I think at more competitive colleges, supplemental essays and I should explain. So a supplement is either other essay questions or short answer questions or other things that a college will ask you to do in addition to the standard materials, typically with the common application. So for example, when I worked at Dartmouth, we would have a supplemental essay question that said, why do you want to come to Dartmouth? That's a very common one, right? Like colleges will ask you, why do you want to go to, whatever school? And oftentimes we would get these big, beautiful essays, right? That were clearly edited, sometimes questionably so, both how much help they got. And then we'd get to the supplement where we would say, why do you want to go to Dartmouth? And the student would write, two sloppy sentences that were very generic, right? Then, we'd get, I want to go to Dartmouth because they have a great faculty to staff ratio, which is basically like the only thing we tell you on our own website, right? We would get a lot of information that was like in bold print on our website. And so, I tell students, while the essay is important, oftentimes the supplements can really push students in one direction. And so I tell them, please think about those supplements carefully. If a student asks you, why, do you want to go to, Lehigh? Lehigh wants you to show demonstrated interest. They want you to prove that you care. They want you to prove that you've done your research. And so you don't want to say, I want to go to Lehigh because they have great professors. You want to say, I want to go to Lehigh because they have Professor Swayze in their creative writing department. And I've always wanted to take fiction, blah, 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 right? Like you want to do your homework and show them in those supplements that you care about these colleges. You also want your, writing to hold up to whatever your essay is, right? Like you don't want to have sloppy, rushed writing samples in the rest of the application, because it shows that you just kind of ran through this. And for us, at Dartmouth, we had something called the peer recommendation, where we would ask every student, it was optional, and we would ask students to submit a recommendation written by a peer. And it was crazy how many students didn't do it to me. I couldn't believe it. And so anything that's optional, like if you care enough to apply to Kenyon in Ohio, and they ask you for an additional recommendation, you should do it. Like nothing optional is optional. And so I tell students, when it comes to the essay, the bad news is like, you have to focus and care about these other pieces as well. And I know that puts pressure on kids, but I would argue, like, if you're going to go through all the anxiety and stress of applying to these colleges, you might as well fill out those supplements well, do your homework. If you tour colleges, pay attention so that when it's time to fill out the supplements, you kind of have extra things to talk about. Oh my goodness, there's so much to talk about. Okay, lastly, I think kind of the big question I get is just, what's the best advice you can give? What's the best advice you can give families, whether they're in their senior year and they're, they just applied to colleges and they're waiting for their spring results, or they're freshmen or sophomores. And I really think, when I worked at Dartmouth, the reality of how many students were rejected was palpable. And again, I think families that viewed admissions decisions as any sort of decision of worth or value or judgment, it hurt. It hurt, and it didn't need to hurt, because admissions offices are making decisions, again, based on the business of their college, which is out of your control. And so my best advice to students when they come to me and they say, what should I be doing? What can I do? I say to them, high school matters. High school is the focus right now. And you shouldn't be focused on your junior year of high school because you're worried about your freshman year of college. You should be focused on your junior year of high school because it's going to prepare you for your senior year of college, right? This is a building block. Our education system is a building block education. And I would see parents who, I talk about this in the book, that they would, if a student got into Yale, it was like, that was the prize. The admission to Yale was the prize. And then it was over, right? My kid got into Yale, therefore it's over. And I would say, oh my God, your kid, first of all, needs to go to Yale. And your kid's going to go on from Yale. Like, life goes on. And if your kid doesn't get into Yale, it doesn't mean he has any, fewer of the wonderful attributes that he already has. And so when I tell students, like, think about high school for the sake of high school, do things for the sake of you, explore, engage. I get lots of questions about alumni interviews right now during the pandemic. I think a lot of colleges have either put a halt on them or they're trying to do them virtually. And students, they get so nervous about these alumni interviews. And I tell them, like, this is an opportunity for you to connect with a stranger and have a conversation as if you are, trying to get a job, which is like, a good skill to learn for the rest of your life. And so I would say, when students, think about, okay, what's the best thing I can do to prepare for college? I say the best thing you can do is prepare for high school. Think about the building blocks, do the best you can with what you have. And then from a prescriptive standpoint, explain it as much as you can to the admissions committee. Be as thorough as possible. Lean on counselors, helpers. I think, this parent venture thing is so wonderful and lovely. And there are so many organizations that are there to help. And I also think, like, don't get caught up in the hullabaloo. There's so many rumors out there. There's so much going on. There's so much misinformation. And I tell students, I don't think they should need to spend $1 on the college admissions process if they have the ability to find good resources, which are counselors, teachers, free SAT books in your library. I'm very sympathetic to students going through this, and I want the best for them. And I'm going to end, because I know, oh my gosh, it's already 9:15. I just want to point out, when I wrote this book, I'm going to hold it up again. Where is it? My publisher wants me to hold it up again. When I wrote this book, I said to my husband, I talked the talk. Now I have to walk the walk. I am the mother of a now 5-year-old kindergartner and a 3-year-old nursery school student. And I already feel the pressure, right? I already feel the craziness of what soccer program should my kindergartner be in, what nursery school should my 3-year-old go to? And, I come from a place where, I went to public school, like we didn't have a ton of resources. Like it's a lot. It's a lot to navigate no matter where you are in the process. And so I bought these, I don't know if you can read these pennants, but when I wrote the book, I bought these pennants off Essay. One says kindness, one says be a nice human, and the last one says curiosity. And I bought them just because I wanted to remember, as someone who is becoming a mother and is going to go through this someday, whether my kid never goes to college, whether he's, goes to wherever, I wanted to remember what matters. I wanted to have kind of an echo of that New York Times op-ed about that custodian recommendation. I wanted to keep my perspective on the process, but also know that at the end of the day, he can fill out a college application, he can take back control of the process, do the best he can, and there is a college out there for everyone. So I realized I talked a lot. Thank you guys. I'm here for questions. Charlene, I'll hand it over to you. I don't know if we have questions, but I'm here.
We do. Thank you, Becky. That was absolutely spectacular. My son is about to become a dad in 6 weeks, and I will never forget when he was 5 days old, lying there, and I started crying about the day that he would leave for college. So we get it. It's a big deal. And I think you really help people feel good about just being themselves and bringing your kid, bringing themselves to you as an admission director. And I'll hold up my book too, because I love this book. I love this book. And it was referred to me by Lara Sandar, who is a college advisor in one of our local high schools. So thank you, Lara.
Thank you, Lara.
All right, well, we've got a few minutes and we've got a lot of questions, Becky, so let's have at it, okay? Again, thank you everybody, for being here. There's a lot of you online. We're going to get to as many questions as we can, but I really recommend you get your book because she answers them all in here. Okay, here's a good one. Can your child still be accepted to college, Ivy League, not the goal, if they have a 504, an individualized educational plan, and take modified math class?
Yeah. Great, wonderful question. So first of all, let me take a step back. There is a college out there for everyone, right? And there are so many colleges out there that are doing so many things for so many different people. But this is an easy one because I think, any sort of kind of modified plans, IEPs, any of that stuff. I mean, we, as colleges, we would receive applications from students with all sorts of IEPs, and sometimes students would tell us, sometimes they wouldn't. It was more of a personal decision. I think I would recommend that you talk to a counselor about how to, move forward with that. But for us, we at Dartmouth, we were required to have those services for students who were currently at the college. So I think most, and I can't say all, but I'd say most colleges and universities are prepared to help those students as they'd help any student. And so therefore the admissions process needs to reflect that as well.
Okay, thank you. That made a lot of parents feel better. All right, here's one that I've heard you use this phrase. They say college admissions is a match to be made, not a prize to be won. Can you speak to the fact that each college is truly different from one another, especially regarding their culture or vibe?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I'm not even sure that some of them are that different. To be honest, I think, here's what I think. I think that like anything, your experience is going to be your own because you're going to be surrounded by, your freshman roommate. Who knows who your freshman roommate's going to be, right? That could make or break a situation. But the skills that you bring to college to handle whatever freshman roommate you get are going to help you through the process. This is totally stolen and I don't know who wrote this. So if anyone out there knows, but I saw this brilliant thing on a Facebook group for college counselors a couple months ago. And this counselor, I think he was a counselor, was talking about the US News and World Report rankings and how ridiculous they are. And how all of these colleges, are trying to get more competitive just to go up in rankings which, if you read my book, I don't understand. I think the Ivy Leagues need to stop recruiting overrepresented students, because what's the point if we get down to 1% admit rate? Like where's the win there, right? We might as well do a lottery system, but I'm off my soapbox. Anyway, he was saying that these rankings are so crazy. And he was saying, he made the comparison to if you were talking to someone who was going to go on a honeymoon and you said to them, here are the top 10 places you should honeymoon, right? And number one could be Hawaii, but number two could be Aspen, right? And they're different places for different people. And I thought that's brilliant to go along with colleges, because someone could say Stanford is the best college in the United States, and someone else could say Princeton, and someone else could say, the Colorado School of Mines, and they're all different. Yet there are clusters of similar schools. I'll use the example. I went to Colby in Maine. They're often clustered with, there's Colby, Bates, and Bowdoin. They're about 45 minutes from each other. They're all small liberal art NESCAC schools. And to be honest, they are a little different, but they're very similar. And so would I have been happy at any of those schools? Probably. And so when I read a college guide and it said, hey, look at Colby, you'd also look at those schools. And so I find there's some, I think it's a good thing for students as they go through this process that, hey, if you're looking at, Kenyon, I don't know why I keep talking about Kenyon tonight, but if you're looking at Kenyon, then maybe you want to look at Oberlin, maybe you want to look at St. Olaf, like trying to cluster some of these schools that are a little bit similar, and then letting you tease out the vibe. Or frankly, I think there's nothing wrong with, how do you feel about the school? And if you don't like it, you don't like it. Move on. There's others.
Okay, fair enough. And find out if your kid likes snow or sun. Those are very important, right?
Very important.
Okay, here's a good question, Becky. Why do colleges focus so much on what a student plans to major in and or career goals? Seniors writing their essays are only 17 or 18, but there seems to be an expectation that they will have a life plan.
Amen.
Amen.
It is, we're asking too much of these students. And so the answer is, interestingly, colleges handle this very differently. And I know I used to travel with Duke a lot, and Duke has an engineering school that is a separate, if you say you want to major in engineering at Duke, and this was true a couple of years ago, I don't know if it's true, I'm assuming it's still true, but they had to kind of keep their eye on the engineering numbers. And so you had to know that you wanted to major in engineering because you went in that pool.
Yeah.
Whereas at Dartmouth, we have an engineering school, but we we never had to worry about those numbers for whatever reason. So it was very different. So if you said, if you knew you wanted to be an engineer, you had to apply to the Duke engineering program. But here you could say you wanted to be an English major and still be in the engineering school at Dartmouth. And so schools handle it very differently. The reason they're keeping an eye on it is solely for, it's because it's a business. They have to keep the professors employed, right? They need German majors if they're going to employ German professors, and they're going to have a German students. But I will say, at Dartmouth, when I worked there, the number one most common major was undecided.
So that's okay.
And that's okay.
Okay. That would have helped me 12 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Undecided. And we knew, like, we didn't keep close tab. I mean, we weren't really focusing on that, but it was something, people will say, should I put, a major that's less popular? Like, should I put that I want to major in, religion rather than economics to play that card? And I would say, no, be authentic, because they'll see in the rest of your application. If you've never taken a religion class, you don't mention it, and they have no idea why you want to take it, we're going to say, hey, why the heck are you saying that you want to major in religion, right? So be authentic. And if it's undecided, put undecided. Don't lose any sleep about it. It's okay.
All right. I would be remiss if I did not ask you this question. And you do have a whole chapter on this, so let's touch on it. You say that students and their families should be realistic about finances and college affordability. Do you think parents should include students in discussions about finance and filling out the FAFSA? Absolutely. And how embarrassing is it that I just talked for an hour and never talked about financial aid? And I say in the book, it's in the beginning of the book, I worked in admissions for how many years, and I never worked a day in financial aid, because at both St. Lawrence and Dartmouth, they were kept separate. And we worked together for certain things, right? But it wasn't
for me, it was very separate. I'm not trained in it. I couldn't tell you anything about the FAFSA except for how I filled it out. And yet that is the most critical piece. And frankly, I feel like that's a starting point discussion, even before you start talking about making the list. This is a growing opportunity to learn about loans, right? Like, what's need blind, what's need aware, what's a merit scholarship. And I think this is a great time for families to get together to talk realistically about finances, realistically about how, you're going to pay this back. So financial aid is a great first step. And I think that many colleges have their estimated student calculators where you can go online right now. And if your finances are relatively, what's the word I should use? Simple, right? Like if there's not a lot of complicated stuff, you can get an estimate from lots of colleges and universities of how much a college would give you in like need-based financial aid, or however they break it down. And so that's a good way to kind of dip your toe into and just kind of get an idea for what's out there.
Thank you, Becky. Good advice. We often bring Lynn O'Shaughnessy, who has a great website, Parents, called The College Solution, and she's a financial journalist for higher education. Check that out.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so many questions. We could really do this all night, but we're not going to. Here's a question. I like this one. So even though there are thousands of applicants, do you actually not dismiss the ones with low GPAs or test scores? Do they have a chance?
I love that question because it's a question I certainly believed, before I applied. So truthfully, and let me just say, admissions is changing drastically. And I don't have a magic 8 ball. I don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, as I said before, as these numbers continue to, as more applications are going to these schools and certain schools are struggling to keep together, like there's a lot happening right now. And I think it's a really interesting time in education. And I'm really curious what's going to happen. Having said that, when I talked about like SATs, like what we put out there is what we'd get. Truthfully, when I worked at Dartmouth and they got, thousands and thousands of applications per year, there were very few quote unquote unqualified students. And what I mean by that is like, we didn't see a lot of kids with poor transcripts because they wouldn't have applied, right? It's not, if you're a C- student, there's not much getting you in Dartmouth. And so we saw what we put out there is what we got back. And so, if you have a low GPA, would you be dismissed? I think we'd quickly look through to make sure that we weren't missing anything, right? Like, are we missing something here? Mm-hmm. But we didn't see many low GPAs is the truth. And as I just read, I mean, I keep going back. I can't believe this in the Atlanta Journal that 55% have an A or an A average. I mean, that's crazy to me. But I also think I kind of lived that, right? Like we see a lot of really strong students, but we had to dive deeper. And so nobody was dismissed, but we wouldn't have a lot of, I think the pools get what they put out there. And I think that's true across the board.
All right. So parents, caregivers, everybody online, we really hope that you have benefited from Becky Sabky's great advice tonight. I really do highly recommend you pick up her book. It is great. I haven't put so many yellow sticky notes on a book since grad school, and it's been a couple of years. But Becky, you've really given people so much hope and so much optimism. What kind of parting words would you like to leave us with tonight?
Yeah, I think my parting words are just, I'm so sympathetic to students going through this. And I'm also so excited for them because I've worked with a lot of students. I've worked with a lot of students who didn't get into Dartmouth. I've worked into a lot of students who did. And truthfully, of the thousands and thousands of students I've seen, there are maybe less than a handful that like didn't end up in a place they were happy with, right? And so wherever you are, it seems overwhelming. It feels like a lot is asked of you, but I also think this is a real opportunity for growth, to look inward, and also, again, take what's in control and let go of what's not in your control. And if you focus on high school and if you enjoy high school because it goes quickly, this is a building block opportunity. And I hope that you find some joy in it as you move forward and think about the future, which is pretty exciting.
Thank you, Becky. That is wonderful advice. And parents, all true. Make it fun. Make it a journey. Make it an experience. you can do that with your kids. Well, Becky Sabky, thank you so much for your brilliant book, Valedictorians at the Gate. We are so grateful to you tonight, coming to us all the way from Vermont. Take care, everybody. Again, this will be on video, recorded in our video library. Good night, everybody. Stay well, take care, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.